Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Connected by Controversy. I'm your host, Chris White. And with us today is my guest co-host, biologist Dr. Victor Fett. And we'll be talking to Natalie Pithers over in the UK, who is with Genealogy Stories. And we wanted to get in touch with her because Victor found out through a contact of his that Natalie is organizing an event called History for Ukraine next weekend, March 26th through the 27th, which is a 24-hour event, right?
Yeah, it's 24 hours long. Yeah, I kind of got a little jolt of adrenaline then when you said next weekend. I was like, oh, God, it's coming up soon.
It is, isn't it? Yeah, I guess it's in 10 days from now. We still got some time. Yeah, to prepare.
Hopefully. No,
well,
it's all in hand.
We're very interested in this, and we're very glad that you're helping to raise awareness in this very unique way, and also to raise funds. Can you just tell us how you came up with this idea?
Yeah, well, so I think like a lot of people around the world, I turned on the news and seen what was happening in Ukraine and was horrified and wanted to do something. And I think especially being in Europe, I think your kind of first instinct is I could get in a car and I could drive down and I could bring some donations and that kind of thing. But I've got 3 small children, so that's probably not very plausible really. And I think it just kind of played on my mind, at the back of my mind, what can I do? And then I was having a shower, and I always joke that my best ideas happen in the shower. And I just kind of got this light bulb moment of, I don't know whether you have similar things in the US, but in the UK, we have events like Children in Need and Red Nose Day, which are quite are kind of national days where celebrities do lots of little sketches, and it kind of goes on all day and all night. And in between all the sketches and things, people ask for money for charity. And I just kind of thought, oh, what if we could do something history related? I would sit and watch 24 hours worth of history, and there must be lots of other people like me. And that was the idea, really, that we could, originally it started as maybe I could sell tickets for something. And then it kind of evolved into, hey, why don't we live stream it and ask people to donate what they can, which felt much more inclusive.
Great. Victor, you want to tell us how you found out about this?
It's a long story, but to make it short, I'm one of the Lewis Carroll scholars in the United States. I'm actually the first Russian translator of Hunting of the Snark back in the 70s. And through the Carrollian Society, its former director, August Imholtz, who used to work as bibliographer in the Library of Congress. He just spread the word yesterday, and here we are.
Oh, wow, that's incredible. That's incredible.
How about that? Gosh, it occurred to me too. All 3 of us are from different places, but we're coming together on this cause because this does interest everybody around the world. This is such an important event. And the idea that you're actually focusing on history too is so important. What made you want to focus on history and maybe not like the current events only?
Well, I guess my background is in history. So I'm a genealogist or a family historian. So I work in history every day, and I know that I know the genealogy community very well. And I must admit, when I sent my tweet out, I kind of expected the genealogy group to kind of jump on it and spread the word and it to be a genealogy event. But I was absolutely delighted when historians of all different types kind of got on board. I mean, I volunteer for a kind of non-official organization, a group called Historians Collaborate, and we're always looking at different ways that different types of historians can collaborate and kind of promoting cross collaboration across historic fields and disciplines and levels of expertise. So it's kind of with that hat on as well. It's been absolutely wonderful to see all these different historians of all different types kind of coming together to unite on something. And I think history is obviously very relevant to any political situation, isn't it? You tend to look back and look at the history of the places or the people in order to understand current events. So it does feel quite fitting.
And go ahead, Victor.
Oh, I just wanted to ask for this panel, for this recording. My experience in the United States, where I live half of my life for 33 years, is that people here are not entirely aware of the history of Eastern Europe, although millions of Americans stem from here. I assume that in Great Britain, there is more understanding with all the Polish people who came over after the war and many other events?
I would like to say yes, but I'm not entirely sure that's the case. I mean, I did, so obviously I did history at school, and we covered a little bit about post-war, but not a great deal. And then I did history at A-level, and which is kind of the next stage up before you go to university. And we did things like the unification of Europe, like, but we're talking Bismarck, and so I'm not sure how educated the average Brit is on the history of Eastern Europe, actually, and certainly not myself either. It's something that I'm quite eager to learn more about, and looking forward to some of the talks on it in this History for Ukraine event.
So on the same note, I remember this rather trite statement by George Bernard Shaw that the only lesson of history is that history doesn't teach anyone. Do you think, or your colleagues think, that we finally have a chance to correct this?
I don't know about my colleagues. I mean, I tend to take a little bit of a different angle on it, in that I believe in the importance of stories and storytelling. And I think history has a big part to play in that. But when you can try and get to hear individual stories, perhaps small histories away from big history, that can have a really powerful impact at an individual level that can become collective. Yeah, I'm not sure if that answers your question, or you can see what I mean.
Yeah, we can see this too with some of the individual stories that are coming out in the news right now. But the news is also, just especially in the Western press, is kind of focusing on tragedy and struggle, and there's these glimpses that we're getting. But my fear is that people will just kind of be thinking in terms of emotion for a little while, but if they don't really have a fundamental understanding of the broader stories, the stories that go far back in time, that unite people and divide them, cause struggle and strife, then they're just going to be able to turn it off. Like it's a Netflix series that they just binged watched for the past 2 weeks. And that's what's great about what you're doing. A 24-hour event like that is you can't escape that. There's so much detail that's going to be captured in that.
Yeah, I mean, it's covering all sorts of different types of history, but I guess, I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about tracing your own family history or other people's family histories, is that you do start going, as you start going further and further and further back, you start to see how things have kind of maybe had knock-on effects, or you can start exploring like how things may have influenced the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. And so you do start to get some of that longevity, but at the same time as it being quite personal, because you're looking at individuals. So it's an interesting mix.
If I may start this line of thinking, maybe more interesting, more close to your viewers in the UK. I have been thinking recently about what's going on, and we're talking with Chris. This is not an ethnic conflict. It's political, historical, ethnic, everything together. But analogies do not work. Even 20th century analogies work hardly. I was thinking more into the history, and not even talking about ancient history, but probably for the UK, the analogies would be Scotland versus England, Ireland versus both, the bloody history of the past, where people, with all what we have now, you have a lot of mixed families. Scottish, British, Scottish English, Scottish Irish, whatever. In America as well. In the same vein, Russian Ukrainian families, if you talk genetics, genealogy, there are millions, by millions, both in Ukraine and Russia, and now they stand against each other like in a civil war. It's a combination of War of Independence, Civil War of America, all the bloody wars of British monarchs, and any kind of war. It is a war. So if I'm allowed, I will read later my poem, which is called Battle Song of Ukraine. But I will let Chris to ask you more questions.
I was just going to say, what you said made a lot of sense to me as a British. I mean, I grew up with the Civil War in Ireland, and then kind of the signing of the Good Friday Agreement when I was about 18. So, and when the war in Ukraine and Russia broke out, it did remind me of those kind of news footage that we would hear within our own country back at that time, but without having like the full political kind of historical understanding that you obviously have.
And isn't this interesting too, Victor? I hadn't thought about a genealogist having this kind of a perspective, because I mean, you and I are interested in history, but also you have a scientific angle, but you're also very much interested in the human experience, literary level and a scientific level too. And Natalie, you're interested in history, people's stories, family connections as well, going back in time. This is just the beauty, I think, of different academic disciplines coming together. And yeah, go ahead.
Also, I was telling to my friends that our generation, my generation, are the last people of the book, because everyone are people of the phone. And when my phone goes off right now, I have no juice in my phone, so I take a piece of paper and I just scratched out what I will be talking about. Others cannot do it. My students cannot do it. So it's most important that we write down our family histories, and especially early what we remember from our grandparents who didn't have phones. And we are the last one who can do it, because our grandchildren may not be able to do this in the same way, you know, with a pen on a piece of paper.
Wow.
I don't know. I always revert to pen and paper though, so maybe I'm old school. But no, I agree. I run a club called the Curious Descendants Club, which is all about writing your family history. And we recently had a workshop on food history, and one of the questions that the teacher raised was, describe to me your grandparents' kitchen. And it just this whole flood of memories came back for the whole group, and it got them talking. But then they were thinking about how actually they could go and ask their, you know, those of us that have grandparents still living or parents still living could go and ask our parents and our grandparents that question. And of course, you start bringing in all sorts of social history when you talk about a kitchen. So yeah, no, I agree. In the really important to capture your memories and those of your loved ones as much as possible.
Let me share my personal experience. When I was in 7th grade, and this was in Soviet Union, where people, adults didn't talk much about kids, about what is going on or what was going on. My grandfather was alive, and I asked him about his history. And it was already past Stalin's time, 1960s, and he was very old, in his 70s. He talked, and I wrote it down, a couple of pages. I found out that he studied in France before 1914, that he came home to Ukraine, places which are now bombed by Putin's troop, is his native town of Rivne. He came home for summer vacation 1914, like in a novel. He never went back to Paris, but his sister's family was left there. We reconnected in 70 years, when my grandfather was long dead already, but he left for me a couple of pages, which I wrote down myself, which had combination of names, a name and last name. I found them among the list of survivors of Holocaust. This was Jewish family, which was sent from Paris to the camps in Poland, but was not completely exterminated. I have my second cousin, who is 90 years old right now, living in Paris. We reunited in 2005. And this was, they didn't believe that we survived. We didn't believe that they survived, but we found the same picture in the photo album, shot in 1920s. You know, when you make pictures in Paris, you make several prints and you send one to Russia. And we found the same picture, which was scanned by my father in Siberia at this time, sent back to Paris, and we all came together in Paris in 2005. So miracles happen of this kind only if you write things down.
Wow.
Really, that's incredible.
Yeah, very well put.
It's written down, yes.
Well, and you're showing right there, Victor, the importance of kind of combining this genealogy history with real history and historical knowledge. Because as you're telling that story, I'm thinking the person who doesn't understand the geography or the history of Europe, Eastern Europe, they can't connect very well with that. And that's where this program is so important. Can you talk to us, Natalie, about the lineup of historians that you're going to be that are going to be in the program?
Yeah, so we've got where are we now? I think we've got 45 out of 48 speakers across the 24 hours locked down with times. And we've got some fantastic names like we've got Charles Spencer, who's kicking us off with a talk about his book, The White Ship, which is looking at Plantagenets. And then we've got people like Janina Ramirez, Suzanne Lipscomb. These are really big UK historians that regularly feature on channels like the BBC. And then who else we got? As soon as somebody asks me that, I feel like
I knew I didn't want to put you on,
but no,
on the
we
spot.
do. We have lots.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of some of the others we've got.
Fern
Sol
Riddell.
David, Fern Riddell, Kate Williams, Kate Lister. I can't wait for her talk. She's doing a talk on Victorian vibrators, so that should be really interesting. So we've literally got everything from we've got Blaine Bettinger in the US, who's going to talk to us about DNA, using DNA for genealogy. And then we've got Kate, who's doing a bit of sex history. And then we've got Kate Williams, who's doing Mary Queen of Scots. And then in the mix as well, we've got a couple of people who are covering kind of Ukrainian history. So we've got a speaker, and I forget their names, but we've got a speaker who's talking about Ukrainians and Canada, and then another speaker who's talking about Ukraine and Australia. So that should be really interesting. We've got somebody who's talking about urban trauma and recovery. And I forget which speakers are doing which, but yeah, so it's going to be a real broad range of topics.
That's great. Do you know if you've gotten in touch with Serhiy Plokhki yet?
I don't think so.
Okay,
no.
Yeah. He's a Ukrainian historian here in the States, maybe be willing to, but I don't want to impose that. I'm just curious.
Okay, I have to look him up afterwards. Yeah. To email me his name, and I'll go try and see if I can track him down, because we've got a couple of slots left to fill. So
seems like you've pretty much got it filled up now. So can you walk us through the kind of the format of how this is going to work?
Yeah, so there's going to be talks going to be half an hour long, and they're going to be mixed up with some talks will be just half an hour straight talking, others will be kind of 15-20 minutes followed by Q&A. So if you're watching on YouTube, you'll be able to type in your questions, and we'll be able to bring them up on screen. And then in between speakers, we'll be showing some video footage which features some of Ukrainians' heritage, and just reminding people to donate. So throughout the event, there'll be a QR code up, and there'll be sort of ticker tape with a website address. So we've got a Just Giving page that's set up, so all the funds will go straight to the DEC and Red Cross.
Chris Mayer?
Yes,
I think it's very important, we are doing it all the time on our side, to emphasize for people who are listening to this type of talks that ethnographically, Ukraine is a quilted nation which has many, the second largest majority are ethnic Russians, plus millions of mixed families. Russian and Ukrainian languages are different, whatever the Russian government says, but they are intertwined in a specific way, because since this area was more or less colony of Russian Empire, just like many others, but languages are similar, like say, English doesn't have analogy, but I use always Italian and Spanish, or Italian and French. They're mutually understandable, more or less. In this sense, if you read Russian literary classics, unfortunately, people usually do not understand what's going on. For example, Nikolai Gogol, the most famous Russian 19th century satirist, wrote in Russian, although he was from Ukraine. He knew Ukrainian language, he didn't write in it. In the same way, Mikhail Bulgakov, the native of Kiev, the most important Russian Soviet writer of 20th century, wrote about Kiev 100 years ago, a civil war. But at this time, Kiev, like now, was mostly Russian-speaking city. It was part at that time of independent Ukraine, short-lived Republic of 1918, which mostly was supported by German troops of all people. But then Bolsheviks, of course, conquered it, as we know, subdued Ukrainian independence, supported by millions of ethnic Russian, ethnic-speaking people who fled to Ukraine. And after it was conquered, they fled further to Europe, to Poland, and so on. So it is very, very hard to understand for modern world, which used to, is used to simple decisions, black and white decisions, us and them decisions. It's very hard to understand, but my closest analogy is murder against free races. I mean, Tolkien still is working for this, especially since Peter Jackson's movie. It's easy to make not analogies with Napoleon or Hitler even or Stalin, but with murder versus free races. That's what you have now. And the West, in my opinion, the people of the West, not when talking about Far West in Numenor, I think we have chance to defeat the evil once and forever. Maybe not tomorrow, but it's a long fight. But it is final fight because you cannot afford any more Pearl Harbors or Yaltas or Budapest of 1956 or Praga of 1968. You just can't afford it. I mean, the world is done if this is not done. So genealogy, I'm sorry, will be over if this generation doesn't contribute. That's what I think.
Yeah, and I know some fantastic genealogists that work on Jewish heritage, and I interviewed one for a show that I do, and she was explaining to me about how, quite often when she's tracing a family, she obviously gets to World War II and this whole line just stops, and nobody wants that again. That's just awful.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, that's that kind of his. That's why documenting, like Victor says too, that this has to be documented right now. He's pointed out a couple times in the panels we've had that people need to be recognizing that all of this is happening. We're watching, the world is watching what's happening, and they couldn't observe it in the same kind of real time back in 1939. But we have to also remember what was done and hold the Russians accountable for this. And the world is, I mean, the way, like Zelensky is calling on everybody to, the history is going to remember how we responded to this point. And all these aspects are really important. We can't just let this go.
Yeah, I think they're really accessible to people who don't necessarily work in history or even particularly, have it as a hobby or a particular interest as well. I think when you start, talking about the kind of history of a place and the history of a people, that becomes much more accessible. Just language-wise, it's more accessible.
Oh, Google Translate is learning very fast. I now use Russian English translation for narratives, and I hardly edit them. In the last couple of years, it really learned, and this is good. But what I also wanted to say about, I'm a biologist. I actually work on DNA, and you mentioned that there will be DNA experts on the panel. You heard of course, about outlandish claims of Putin's military right now, that Ukraine was working on biological weapon which specifically targets Russian DNA. This would be laughable if they didn't believe it, allegedly. So it would be like, working on weapon which will target Scots, but not Welsh, or not British, not English, something like this, or Welsh, but not Cornish. It's about the same level of stupidity, but people believe anything. Most people believe that that non-GMO foods don't have genes, something like this. It's very easy to make people believe things, and I correspond with people in Russia right now. Most of them do not reply. Some of former friends are replying with state propaganda, saying that they are sure that their army is cutting out cancer from Ukraine's body, things like this. And some ask me to send news because they're cut off news. Facebook is down in Russia, and probably YouTube will be down this week too. And the state is hunting these people. A student in my native town was jailed for putting Ukrainian flag in his window. And these things are unraveling very fast. That's why we are trying to make it at least weekly updates, because things it's incredibly fast and in real in real time. That's the work of historians, I guess. Genealogy, I don't know, our generation will be very different from previous ones because we don't have time. I don't know, I have a 5-year-old grandson right here, and his world may be changing so dramatically by the time he is even 6. I think the world entered the phase of turbulence. All I can say is, as everyone can see, and it's very important that we talk while we can, because right now we can talk over the ocean, but it's not the same as talking to people in Russia face to face.
Yeah, I think as well, the I don't know, one of the things that occurred to me was that even if all the fighting stopped tomorrow, even if, you know, it just finished miraculously tomorrow, you've got, you know, millions of people who've been displaced, whose homes have been destroyed, and that has and have lost loved ones or been separated from loved ones, and that has a lasting traumatic effect. It's got, you know, it's got to have, and that can echo down generations, especially if it's not talked about. So I think it's important to talk about it.
What's the coverage like in oh, go ahead, Victor.
A lot of families I know have been split by this war. Brothers are on different sides, just like in American Civil War or any of wars that Great Britain fought inside its island. Husbands and wives, relatives of all kinds. Children are trapped behind the lines right now. Many of my friends have, who are Americans, have children who are working in Kiev right now. So, and fighting too, whatever their nationality is or ethnic group.
What's the media coverage of the war like over there in the UK?
I actually, I must admit, to a certain degree, I turned it off YTV because I was working on the event as well, and it was just becoming a little bit. I was becoming a little bit obsessed and all-encompassing, and I think sometimes that's not healthy. You can kind of go down a, I don't know. Yeah, you can kind of fall down some rabbit holes there. But no, there's been a lot of media coverage. I mean, on the kind of BBC News app that's on your phone, right at the very top, it's live in Ukraine coverage. You know, 24 hours a day on there. So lots and lots of coverage. And I feel like it's something that most people are talking about regularly. You know, when I go to do the school run, you can hear people kind of, you know, just saying like, oh, I read this and it's awful. And, you know, and have you seen what the government's doing with the refugee scheme or not doing? More to the point, probably. And that kind of thing in the playground. So yeah, I think it's on a lot of people's minds.
And before we close out here, I want to make sure that we can bring some attention to the aid organizations that you're directing donations to. Can you talk about them?
Yeah, so it's the DEC, so it's the Disaster Emergency Committee and the Red Cross, and I picked, part of the reason why we picked those is, well, one, they're in urgent need, but two, they're probably as non-political as you can get, as well, as we wanted to make it something that everybody could feel comfortable donating to. That's
great, and we'll be sure to put a link to the event on the show notes for this program. And before we close out, Victor, did you want to read that poem?
I just sent it to Natalie in a chat window, but I will be happy to read it in case someone wants to broadcast it. Battle Song of Ukraine. The Russians want to wage a war. They always wanted it before. From Baltic to Crimean shores, their history is full of wars. The slaves from hell against the light. They cannot win, they cannot fight. It's time to say once and for all, Ukraine will fight, it will not fall. They say they're brothers of Ukraine. A brother's name should not be Cain. Among the orcs, we have no kin. Ukraine will fight, Ukraine will win. They have no claim on freedom's land. It is not hard to understand. It's time to say, once and for all, Ukraine will fight, it will not fall. We have no need of bloody goon. We let him howl at Kremlin's moon. We let his hordes to run and hide. Ukraine will fight and turn the tide. We fight his tanks with naked hands. So here it starts and here it ends. It's time to say, once and for all, Ukraine will fight. It will not fall. Thank you.
Wow. That's pretty intense. And that's in your third language, right? Doing it in English?
Second, actually, I know English much better than Ukrainian.
Okay.
My native is Russian. I was raised in Siberia. My mom's folks were in Ukraine. I came there every summer for vacation, camping with my father on the same shores, which are now occupied by Putin's troops on the Black Sea.
Well, Natalie, thank you so much for being with us. Is there anything else that you wanted to add to our conversation before we let you go?
No, just thank you very much for having given me the opportunity to share about the event, really, and it was really wonderful to meet you both. I found your poem really moving, Victor.
Thank you. I'm glad. I'm very proud that my last travel to England, I was actually working in Oxford in sorting zoological collections. I'm a zoologist by trade, a very peaceful profession, but I took my time to go to the museums and Christchurch and everything.
And Natalie, what city are you in then right now?
I'm in the countryside, so I'm in Somerset, which is down in the south. So I'm about an hour away from the coast in what I think is probably the most beautiful part of the country. So, but I might be biased.
What's the weather like out there right now?
Well, it was raining all day today, so it's all misty. But yeah, we have had a couple of nice spring days the last couple of days. So.
Oh, that's nice. Well, thanks so much for the event, History for Ukraine, which will be running for 24 hours straight from in London time, though, right? Or UK time. What time does it start again?
Yeah, we picked the weekend that the clocks change in England.
Oh,
so and Mother's Day, so but that kind of feels fitting, really. So midday the 26th of March UK time to 1 p.m. Sunday the 27th UK time.
Where do you plan to put recording of this?
It will live stream across both Twitter and YouTube, and then we've promised the speakers that within 48 hours of the finish time, we'll be deleting everything to protect their IP.
No recording, just
live. No. So it'll probably be up for about 48 hours by the time it all completely comes down. But yeah, no recordings. It became quite complex when you look into IP agreements and all that kind of thing. So.
Well, great. We'll include a link in our show notes then, and we'll have that up in very soon so that people can start preparing to be involved.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Natalie Pithers over in the UK and Victor Fett here in Huntington, West Virginia, from Marshall University, for joining us today. And for those of you who are listening to the program, please do as much as you can to educate yourself, because the media is one aspect of this, but talk to people, read sources, watch talks on YouTube as well from legitimate sources, and get a multinational perspective as well. And so I think this event, History for Ukraine, that Natalie Pithers is organizing is a great example of a one-stop shop for this over the course of 24 hours. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.